Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. And since I horned my way in on this whole thing, Mike gets to pick what we talk about, which leads to hilariously mismatched results because his taste in comics is only good when it precisely coincides with my own. This time around, he picked a comic book event. No real way to say that you like this or even that you don't like it. It's too big for that. It's a comic book event. He picked the death of Superman. Because once upon a time, 30 years ago, the powers that be at DC Comics said, we don't really care, make us lots of money. And the creative team got in 4 cases of Michelob and decided, let's just kill the big guy. Let's just kill Superman. Do we really have a plan? No. Do we really know what we want to do? No. Do we care that this is a beloved and hallmark cultural character that we did not create and of which we are only stewards? No. No, let's just kill the big guy. That ought to get in the news. And it did. It very much did. A comic book came along that I actually don't have the trade paperback. There was a trade paperback that was made of The Death of Superman. That's been reprinted a million times. It's one of the best-selling graphic novels. The Collecting the Issues of The Death of Superman is one of the best-selling graphic novels of them all, just perennially. DC Comics makes a ton of money off this story, even now. 30 years after it came out, they still make a ton of money off this. And I looked. I don't have that trade paperback. I looked everywhere, and I don't. I have the issue, the Superman issue, in which Superman allegedly dies. It came to my local comic shop in a plastic bag that also included a black armband for attending the funeral. And I have that armband somewhere too, but I didn't want to go digging through my long boxes for just one issue. So I looked around on my comic book shelf, my graphic novels and hardcovers. I couldn't believe I didn't have this at all. And I found this volume, Superman, A Celebration of 75 Years, and with a Jim Lee cover there. And it's in here. The Death of Superman is in here. Not the whole storyline, but just the issue. This one here. Superman number 75. The Death of Superman is in here. And this is the culmination of a storyline that had been going on for months in Superman comics. A creature from outer space comes to Earth. It is big, it is gray, it is mindless, it is indestructible, it is incredibly strong. It's quickly given the name of Doomsday. It's just it's just a monster. It's just a monster of the week. It's not made of kryptonite. It's not plotting anything. It's just a big, ugly monster. And it appears to want to do nothing other than just kill everything. So when it finally makes its way to Earth, first it kills Bambi, and then it starts just destroying things, and it gets the attention of the Justice League, DC's foremost superhero team, the Justice League. Only at this particular point, when Doomsday strikes Earth, the Justice League is composed of losers. It's just a gigantic roster of losers. There's a green-haired woman named Fire. There's a white-haired woman named Ice. Fire can burn things just a little bit, maybe enough to cook a hot dog. Ice can cool things just a bit, maybe enough to cool off a beer. There's Guy Gardner, who was introduced as an alternate Green Lantern in Green Lantern's book. In this Justice League, he is not a Green Lantern, but he has a ring with Green Lantern powers. It's yellow instead of green, but it effectively allows him to do anything that he wants with energy constructs. There's a character from Superman called Lady Maxima, who has vaguely defined energy casting powers. There's a mysterious character named Bloodwind, whose origins and nature is not known at the time. There's Blue Beetle and Booster Gold. They were fan favorite characters. They're guys in spandex. They're just guys in spandex. So when Doomsday encounters this League, well, we don't know what Bloodwind can do. Okay, he's too busy being mysterious to be helpful. But we know what Guy Gardner can do. And a giant, spiny, super strong monster creature shouldn't be any trouble to an experienced member of the Green Lantern Corps who is wielding essentially a Green Lantern ring. And yet, this monster cripples and nearly kills Guy Gardner, and does it easily, does it almost instantly, as he cripples and nearly kills almost all the rest of the team. He walks right through the Justice League. The Justice League here is not composed of Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, the real Green Lantern, the Martian Manhunter, the Flash, the Zatanna, for instance. The League is not composed of these people. Instead, it's these candy-ass ridiculous characters who get bruchetted right away by this creature as it plods closer and closer to Metropolis. So finally, Superman has to fight. Superman shows up and has to fight this thing. Now, this is an incredibly big deal, but it is not an immediate deal. Doomsday is cutting a swath of desolation through the country. It's not like he appears suddenly in front of the Daily Planet building in Metropolis. He's out there and he's a known quantity for a long time. Comparatively, a long time. So, I mean, this storyline in the 90s took place at a time when DC's roster of characters was severely depleted and mostly filled with fakes and phonies and substitutes of what kind or another. But still, you'd think that the response would be greater than what Doomsday gets before Superman confronts him. But finally, Superman confronts him alone. The rest of the League doesn't appear to help. A couple of them are up and about. They are able to do it. They don't. And Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen are there at Ground Zero while Superman is duking it out with this giant monster. They're not only there, they're right there. They're right there. They're right next to these two. Lois Lane is right next to these two. Superman never uses his super breath to blow her 2 blocks away, and it can't help but distract him. But he and this creature are fighting. That is Doomsday there. Just a big, blocky, inarticulate monster. Who is, every time he punches or hits Superman, it really hurts Superman. Causes him to bleed. So the 1950s Steve was saying, well, okay, but Superman's invulnerable. So you can't hurt him. You can't make him bleed. But this Superman is the John Byrne Superman, and he is vulnerable. So this creature is just carving up the opposition, and Superman is determined to stop the creature, to fight him. He kisses Lois Lane goodbye and heads off into battle. And we get, this is Dan Jurgens. Dan Jurgens is so bad. I don't know why fans like his artwork. What is happening in that panel? I have no idea what's happening in that panel. Superman is looking at us. There's a sound effect, but it looks to me like Superman is punching Doomsday in the groin. Like that's the first thing that he does. And is he using his head to do it? They'll pay you good money for that in Times Square. But then Doomsday does this to Superman. That's not how anatomy works. You don't, if you grab, Superman is not a cardboard cutout. He's not an ironing board. You don't use his legs to pound him into the ground by his head like that. It's just so poorly done. It's just so horribly done. And look, this is what I meant. Lois Lane is involved in the combat between these two beings. She is involved in the combat. She says, Superman is in trouble and I intend to help him. She's right there while this thing is fighting Superman. That's ridiculous. She wouldn't be. Superman wouldn't want her to be. But anyway, Superman says he wants death and destruction. To stop him, I have to be every bit as ferocious, as unrelenting as he is. And Lois Lane, who is right there, she's 6 inches away from Superman's heat vision. Lois Lane says, but you can't. He wants to kill, and you can't. Superman's heat vision does not have an impact. It's just heat. It's not a battering ram. But Superman is getting more and more beaten up. This creature is hurting him more and more with every passing blow. And we get Dan Jurgens' artwork that is so crowded and terrible. They're all splash panels. Notice, and look at this one. See that? You look at this panel and you think, is Superman hurting? Doomsday is finally crying out in pain. Is Superman hurting him because of the main action of the panel, the thing your eye is looking at? No, it's down there. He's kicking the spines off a knee. That's what's causing the monster to cry out in pain. As ineptly done as possible, even for a splash page, which are not easy to maneuver. And they just keep doing that. They just keep duking it out with each other. Until finally, at the very end of this fight, they kill punch each other simultaneously. That's not possible. They kill punch each other simultaneously, and they both fall. The Kents in Smallville are watching on the big screen. These two Justice League members, that's Bloodwind and that's Ice. Why they're just watching, I have no idea. Why they didn't help. They're just standing there watching, I have no idea. Everyone is just watching as we reach the end of Superman. He croaks out, the ship out of danger. And Lois says to him, you saved the ship. You saved us all. And then he dies. And I read this and I thought, when I read this when it came out, I knew already from the industry press that DC was going to be all behind this. This was not a joke or an imaginary story. In fact, in this volume, let me see if I can get to it. In this volume, they reprint Superman number 149, The Death of Superman, in which Lex Luthor seems to kill Superman. It's an amazingly good story. Amazingly good. I bought this issue too, but I was hugely entertained by it. Whereas the new one, The Death of Superman, I had so many thoughts, and all of them were negative. All of them were negative. There wasn't a single thing I liked about it. Dan Jurgens' artwork, no. But also, every other aspect of it. Needless to say, those of you who watch Epic Comic Book Wednesday are probably waiting for this so you can start your drinking game. Needless to say, this is an ultimate exponent of the Stan Lee virus. Of the idea that comics should be serious and have stakes. Maybe it's not the ultimate exponent. In my mind, the ultimate exponent will always be the Batman supervillain who exhumes the dead bodies of Batman's parents. But either way, sooner, if you introduce the Stan Lee virus, then the guys in the editorial room, hopped up on Michelob, are going to be saying, well, how can we top the last thing we did, instead of saying, how can we tell good stories? And it doesn't get any topper than killing Superman. So I hated the idea. I knew that, just like I knew with the John Byrne era Superman, I knew that every change that John Byrne was making was going to have to be redone. It would just take forever. At the time, I didn't think that I would actually live long enough to see it all right itself, because it would be corrected piecemeal. This weaker Superman, all these dumb innovations would all have to change back to the way they were. It would need to work out of the system like poison. And when I read this issue, I thought, well, okay, but you're not killing Superman, right? You're not killing Superman. So whatever this is, it'll take forever to work this out. But eventually this character is going to come back. And of course, both of them did. Superman and Doomsday came back. But I also thought about, just on the pragmatic level, how dumb this is. Just in terms of timing, sure. In terms of timing, maybe there's no Green Lantern on Earth at the moment. In terms of timing, maybe there's no Wonder Woman at the moment. In terms of timing, maybe no heroes from the Justice Society or any other super team are available. Maybe the real Batman is not available. Maybe Captain Marvel is not available. Maybe Supergirl is not available, any kind of Supergirl. The real Supergirl, the Kryptonian Supergirl, maybe she's not available. And at the time in DC continuity, none of these characters were available. So I guess that part makes sense. But you have an event in mind that you've been planning for months where you're killing Superman. An event that you know will make international news, and it did. Dan Rather talked about it on the evening news. An event that you know will make international news, and you don't plan it any better than this. A monster, a mindless monster from outer space that just beats Superman to death. That's your idea of a great send-off for this character? That's your idea of a great storyline? It isn't. It's dumb and impoverished. And oh my God, the storytelling gymnastics that were necessary to undo this, you would think on one level that the way to bring Superman back to life would be easy. That the Kryptonian designed robots in his Fortress of Solitude are monitoring him. They get the signal that his life signs have winked out. They get him. They whisk him out of his coffin, out of his monument in Metropolis. They bring him to Fortress of Solitude, and they use super science from Krypton to revive his Kryptonian physiology. And that might take a long time. It might be a delicate process, but underneath Earth's lighter gravity and yellow sun, it will be possible. But no, the long, incredibly convoluted story of how Superman survives this, how he comes back alive, is so much worse than that. It's just so much worse than that. Granted, the storyline where Superman does return in a black onesie with a steel S symbol and a mullet, that storyline has some good moments in it, but even that, I was looking at it, even that, and thinking, no, Superman doesn't have a mullet. No, Superman doesn't have limited superpowers. No matter what, I'm glad that the real Superman is back, but no matter what, you're still going to have to change all this. He's going to have to go back to having this haircut with the spit curl. He's going to have to go back to having his unbeatable superpowers so that you tell other kinds of stories about him, not stories about whether or not he can bench press more than his villain. All this is going to have to be changed. It's just, I just have to wait for it to change. That's all. I have to wait for it to change. That's a depressing feeling. That only happened once in a while. In the olden days, 30 years ago when you were buying comics, that feeling only happened once in a while. It happened more often in Marvel than in DC. But it was comparatively rare. Now it is the experience of reading comics, not the exception. Now that waiting for things to be better, for things to go back to normal, is the experience, not the exception. Iceman is not gay. Poison Ivy is not gay. Superman's son is a little boy. He's not a teenager, much less a gay teenager. When comics hits the exact right note on something, that is the note that it's going to return to eventually, or fans won't buy it. And they aren't buying any of those innovations. So, and the same thing, whatever Superman is now, I don't buy Superman. Superman has a monthly comic, and I don't buy it, amazingly. This thing did exactly what that Michelob drunk crowd of editors wanted it to do. It sold unbelievably well. It literally single-handedly saved the finances of the entire company of DC Comics. That's all that it had to do. Once it did that, everybody in the industry, especially the money people up the chain in the C-suite, looked at that and thought, there you go. All right, do more of that. So we've had the deaths of every major character since then. Death is now a running joke in comics now. This would be... the epitome of the cynicism involved here is probably embodied a couple of years ago. DC Comics did an event called The Death of the Justice League. And they were already doing full-color solicitations to comic book stores of two issues down the line to get their pre-orders in which the Justice League is alive and fine. And they didn't think that would leak. They didn't think anybody would notice that. Just the ultimate in cynicism. It should be the death of Superman every issue. But that was such a landmark of popularity, of notice. The mainstream media noticed this, and also sales, that it became a landmark in Superman mythos, and ends up in a book like this, along with far better stories like For the Man Who Has Everything or The Death of Superman. I regret that. There's nothing good about this story. It's just dumb. It might, if you wanted to kill Superman and get the most out of it and show his friends mourning him and show the world without him and whatnot, if you wanted to do that as a storyline, well, I guess if you want to do that as an epic storyline, it's dumb because Superman's invulnerable, so you can't kill him. But it's dumb. But if you want to do that in the Marvel age of comics, fine. But do it better. Do it better. You can't punch. You can't simultaneously. Two people can't simultaneously punch themselves dead, and it's just a big inarticulate monster. It's just a bone spurry monster from outer space. Where is the satisfaction in that? Why isn't it Brainiac? Why isn't it Lex Luthor? It was just dumb. It was just a dumb sales grab event, and unfortunately for for DC Comics, it worked. It worked. It worked on such proportion, to such an extent, that it can't be ignored. The industry has never stopped ignoring it, unfortunately. So I've had to live with it this whole time. I was railing against it for a year to my comic book friends. Them saying, well, that's the whole thing about being a superhero, is that a giant deadly menace could come out of nowhere. It might be the thing you least expect. I was saying, all right, okay, fine. As a storyline, sure, that might be true, that it might be this monster you've never seen before that gives you the hardest time, but this monster wouldn't give Superman a hard time. Doomsday, the monster in this storyline, is super strong. He's as invulnerable as Superman, and he has sharp spurs and spikes coming out of his fists and his knees and his feet and his face and whatnot. Which means that in addition to all this being superpowers, Superman also has super speed and the power of flight. Which means if you do a rough calculation, there are about 12,482 ways Superman could defeat this creature. Easily. He can fly and he has super speed. To say nothing of any of his other abilities. Superman is, of course, stronger than Doomsday. Superman is stronger than anybody. He's Superman. But if you leave out all of that, he still has two enormous tactical superpowers that this being doesn't have. Never even thinks to use them. Never even thinks to use them. So you grab Doomsday by one of those spikes on his face, growing out of his skull. You grab him by one of those spikes and fly him off the planet at Mach 50. And he's reaching up to grab you, to spike you with his super strong spikes. You shift your grip at super speed. And you just keep shifting your grip at super speed. He can't ever hit you. And he can't fly. So he can't stop you. That's ridiculous. It's just every element of it is ridiculous. And yet it is going to be in every volume like this that Superman ever has. So Mike picked a comic book event today that drives me nuts. But it's not the same kind of thing as when he picks one of his dumb Challenges of the Unknown monster comic type things. It's not quite that, because this is too big a phenomenon in the comic book world for me to simply sneer at it. I am sneering at it, but I recognize the seismic effect that it had. I haven't watched Mike's video yet, so I don't know whether or not he's extending his discussion of this to the massive aftermath, because Superman appeared to be dead for a long time in the comics, and the claimants came forward to say, I'm the new Superman, and that formed a whole story on its own that led into the return of the real Superman, of Kal-El of Krypton. I don't know if Mike's going to include that. And also, I've got to watch his video, because I know from Voxering him that he does have the omnibus that DC Comics came out with, which has not only the death of Superman, but that whole storyline following it, and all the intermediary stuff before those substitute Supermen start showing up. And the size of the thing is mind-boggling. I can't imagine having it. I can't imagine reading it. So many of those issues are so bad. Oh my god. But I can't imagine having it, even if all the issues are great. It's too big. All my complaints about these omnibus editions magnified 1,000-fold. I'll have to watch and see, but you will too. Mike always puts his videos up before I do, so I'll leave a link to it down below. But that is our comic for today. It is The Death of Superman, one of the best-selling, if not the best-selling, single-issue comic book in the history of the industry. And the graphic novel has never stopped selling. It will be in your library. It's in every library. It's in every store, every bookstore. It's The Death and the Return of Superman are two huge-selling graphic novels. For all the wrong reasons. That's our comic for today. I didn't really enjoy revisiting this, but we'll see what we come up with next week. It's bound to be interesting no matter what. Which this is not. The Death of Superman is a boring comic. So we'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.